Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Tasks Before Apps, Evaluating and Using the Best EdTech Tools. Today's webinar is sponsored by NetRef, a powerful internet management tool that helps students stay on task and helps educators determine the true ROI of their EdTech investments. Before we begin the program, I'll review just a few quick housekeeping items. We'll be accepting questions throughout the webinar, and we'll hold a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. You can go ahead and send in your questions as they come up for you using the questions feature in your control panel. I'll put them into the queue to be answered during the Q&A. If you experience any technical difficulties during the presentation, you can use that same questions feature to get my attention, and I'll do my best to resolve the problem for you. We will be sharing a recording of the webinar and the presentation slides with you after the webinar today, so keep an eye on your email inbox tomorrow for details on how to access those materials. They'll also be posted on the NetRef website, which is net-ref.com. Finally, we'll also be doing a drawing for a free copy of the book, Task Before Apps, Designing Rigorous Learning in a Tech-Rich Classroom, which is written by today's speaker, Dr. Monica Burns. We are going to be holding that drawing at the end of the webinar, and you do have to be on the line to be included in that drawing and to win. So please stay on through the webinar for your chance to win that great book that is going to provide even more insight and resources than Dr. Burns is going to go into today during our hour together. Now let's get started. I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Monica Burns. Dr. Burns is a curriculum and EdTech consultant, an Apple Distinguished Educator, and founder of the popular blog and website, ClassTechTips.com. As a classroom teacher, Monica was part of her school's federal magnet funding leadership team and was a vocal advocate for bringing one-to-one technology into her fifth grade classroom. Realizing the power of tech tools in the classroom, Monica started ClassTechTips.com to provide a resource for educators and administrators on implementing EdTech in the classroom. Since starting ClassTechTips.com, Monica has presented to teachers, administrators, and tech enthusiasts at numerous national and international conferences, including South by Southwest EDU, ISTE, and EduTech. She also visits schools across the country to work with pre-K to 12 teachers to make technology integration exciting and accessible. In addition to the Task Before Apps book, Monica is the author of Deeper Learning with QR Codes, Augmenting Reality, a Scannable Solution for Your Classroom, and #FormativeTech, Meaningful, Sustainable, and Scannable Formative Assessment with Technology. She is a graduate of the University of Delaware and Hunter College and completed a doctorate in Global Education Leadership at Lamar University in 2016. We are very excited to have Dr. Burns with us today, and we're looking forward to her sharing all of these insights and recommendations that she has for us. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the program over to her now.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to spend some time with you today to tackle our topic of tasks before apps. So as we go ahead and jump into our work together, I want to go over a few things of what we'll be chatting about in today's webinar. We're going to start off today talking about this tasks before apps mindset and what it looks like to really make sure you're putting learning front and center in a classroom where you also have access to plenty of apps and websites and different types of technology tools. We're also going to spend some time today talking about frameworks that support EdTech decision making. So ways that you can leverage frameworks that are popular in conversations around education technology, others you may not have heard of before but want to dive into a little bit deeper, all to find a common language to support your decision making and your conversations around future decisions and initiatives around education technology. We're also going to talk about how to identify key goals for the school year. So how to identify those things you really want to focus on when it comes to your goals for the year and thinking about how education technology can help support those goals as it relates to your particular initiatives that you decide upon. Then we'll look at strategies for building your EdTech tool belt. So some things that you should consider when you are looking at tools, when you are evaluating new tools, and deciding if they really are a great fit for your students, for your school community, and for the goals that you've set out for this year. So, all of this will be under that umbrella of making sure that you are choosing tools that are just right for the reasons you've identified, not because they're best of the best in their particular category, but so that you can evaluate how they fall into the goals that you've set for this school year. So, this idea of a tasks before apps mindset really comes from this gut check, as I like to call it, that I developed when I started really sitting back and saying, how am I truly using technology in a way that's going to energize and elevate teaching and learning, not just because something is fun or flashy or new? So, this phrase, tasks before apps, is the title of my book, Task Before Apps, right? The same title. And it's really what I came to believe. And it's my just kind of mantra to remind myself we really want to make sure we're putting that learning first. So there are some guiding questions that I always like to ask that help make sure that we are truly embracing this task before apps mindset. At the end of today's lesson, what should students understand? So, what are the learning goals you have set for an individual daily lesson or for multiple lessons all together in a unit? What are your learning goals? What are your objectives? What do you truly want students understand about a topic? Then the question, how will I know for sure if students understand? What are the expectations that you've set for students that you know are going to be part of what you are looking for when you check for understanding, and you've laid that out from the get-go, right from the beginning? And then what would I like students to accomplish today or this week or within this unit? So what are those learning experiences that you've identified are going to help your students interact with the learning goals and meet your expectations? Now, none of these questions have to do with a website or with a mobile app or with a Chromebook or an iPad or any type of digital experience. But these questions can ground you as you start thinking about, how can I accomplish these goals that I've set for myself when it comes to designing learning experiences for students? And how can I use digital tools to really elevate and energize that experience to make sure I'm meeting the needs of everyone to help them get to where I'm going? So if I know what the learning goal is, I know what the expectation is, and I start to design that learning experience, how can I use technology to truly provide an opportunity for students to interact with the content, to make meaning of what is in front of them, to activate their prior knowledge, to build background knowledge, and to help them apply that content in a way that is really meaningful, relevant, and authentic to them? So all of that comes together with our task before apps mindset and can help us really think about the way that we are using digital tools effectively. So the ACEs framework is a framework that I developed when talking first about scannable technology, but threaded into my work with tasks before apps. And the ACEs framework stands for access, curate, engage, and share. So I want to break this down for us as we think about evaluating the way that we're using different digital tools today, so that you can start that process of reflection on what's happening right now and planning on what's happening in the future, to make sure that the use of the digital tools students have access to really help them accomplish the goals within this framework, as well as some of the other ones that I'll mention today that you may want to dive into a little bit deeper. So when we think about this idea of ACEs framework, the first is access. So with digital tools, students can easily and efficiently locate content hosted online to find information, answer questions, or connect with others. So your primary goal with a particular set of digital tools or resources might be to increase access for students so that they can find things, they can locate information, and they can connect with others more easily. Or your goal might be around curation, so being able to curate resources. So students interact with resources handpicked by their teacher that relate to course content, student interest, or the individual needs of learners. So maybe you're choosing tools, or as you're evaluating what tools you're using, you're wanting to make sure you have access to tools that help you curate and then distribute resources easily to students. So this is where differentiation comes into play, so that you know you are able to get everyone exactly what they need to meet their individual needs as learners, connect to their student interest, or to the course content that's specific to them as well. Your next piece to think about with this ACEs framework is engage. So students use technology tools to build transferable skills during hands-on learning activities that require them to create products and collaborate with others. So this doesn't have to be the gimmicky type of hook, right? Or something that's going to feel really fluffy where students are engaged just because they happen to have never seen something before. But engagement in the sense that students are in the flow of learning. They're really building skills that are transferable beyond a particular digital device or content area. They are hands-on, they are making something, they are collaborating with others. And then share. Students have an authentic audience for their learning, setting a purpose for their work, and connecting their creations to the world outside the classroom. So digital tools allowing students to connect with that authentic audience, to really see a purpose for their work, and then sharing their learning with the world. So if you are evaluating the way that you are using different EdTech tools, you may want to start a conversation with these 4 words in mind. Are students using digital tools in these categories? Is one area where you're using a particular tool also able to jump into a second area? Or are you finding that most of your tools that you use are really just around access, right? So just about getting kids into a space where they can search and find and locate things, right? That's part of the puzzle, but it's not everything that we're looking for here. So when you're looking at this idea of access, curate, engage, and share, it may be part of the conversation that you want to have around balance to make sure you are addressing all of these areas with different digital tools. Now, this ACEs framework is one that comes from the experiences I've had working with learners of different ages, right? This chart itself, or this graphic, if you will, right, is adapted from my book, Tasks Before Apps. But there are other frameworks in education technology that I want to touch upon as we dive into some of the other areas a little bit more granular, so that you have an opportunity to make connections to things you're already talking about, and really have that common vocabulary. So the 3 frameworks we're going to look at, 2 more briefly, 1 more deeply, is TPACK, T3, and the SAMR model. So these are 3 frameworks that are commonly used in conversations around education technology, and I don't want to overwhelm you with frameworks or with research or with acronyms to remember. My point in bringing this into our conversation today on Tasks Before Apps and evaluating technology tools is to really make sure you have a common language, that you have something to come back to, and you have conversations around digital integration. And so you can decide where you want to dive in a little bit more deeply. The first one I want to mention is TPACK. TPACK.org. I put a little link down at the bottom of the screen, is where you can find more information on the history and the background of this particular framework. It's evolving. It's not just kind of a one person gets credit for it, as much as many folks who have contributed to the research around this. So TPACK is really bringing together 4 different things when we talk about technological, pedagogical, and content, and then the knowledge that brings this all together. So kind of this extra category beyond just the ones you see above you. So you can think of this as intersections of knowledge at different parts. So our content knowledge, understanding the actual content, right, the meat behind a particular topic that you are instructing students on, so having that knowledge set. Then the pedagogical knowledge about the best practices for teaching in general, and then technology knowledge, so understanding, right, how things work, and then bringing them all together. So with the different layers that you see here, right, having pedagogical and content knowledge is great. Having technological and content knowledge is great. But what you're really looking for is bringing these three areas together, these kind of intersecting circles, if you will, of technological, pedagogical, and content knowledge so that it all comes together. Now, this framework might be one that you want to dive into a little bit deeper with your staff, right, when you're talking about using digital tools, or you may want to explore the T3 framework. Dr. Sani Magana, if you go to maganaeducation.com, you can learn more about his work. His T3 framework breaks down the way that we use digital tools into three big areas with two sub areas each. So translational, where automation and consumption are the primary use cases for digital tools. Transformational, where there's production and contribution, where kids are making things, contributing to conversations and discussions around a particular topic. And then transcendent, which goes beyond that and encompasses inquiry design and social entrepreneurship. So with his framework, he's looking at this movement from T1 all the way to T3, going just from that kind of increased efficiency of automation and consumption, all the way to preparing students for inquiry design and social entrepreneurship. The last one I want to mention as we dive into this discussion today on evaluating digital tools is the SAMR model by Ruben Puentatura. If you go to his website, which you see listed at the bottom of the screen, you can learn more about the SAMR model. This is, probably the most popular, I wouldn't say probably, but definitely is the most popular within K-12 for talking about use cases for digital tools. So the SAMR model is sometimes seen as a ladder that you're moving up, as a pool where you're diving in to the deep end, or you're working your way through the shallow end, moving into more of a deep end. So substitution being that really kind of clear, we used to do this on paper, now we can do it on technology tools. So no real big change, just substitution of doing the same thing with digital tools. Augmentation, where we start to shift a little bit of the way students interact with a text, where there are some changes made, but no real huge improvement in terms of what is going on with digital tools. But then the modification and redefinition is really where we start moving along this pathway to do something that just wasn't possible before. So moving away from just enhancements to something that is really transformational. So this idea of using a framework isn't about memorizing words or evaluating teachers in the sense of you're only doing this or you need to be doing that and you can never do this other type of technology integration. But it's really about having a conversation around the way that we use digital tools so that we can have productive evaluation take place and make decisions based on what we're seeing. So when we use a framework, there are a few reasons that this is something that you would consider to use. So not saying that there's one right answer with which framework to use, but that establishing a framework that you are going to come back to really gives us a common language to talk about the integration of different digital tools. It provides a context for reflection so that when you are looking back to say what worked, what didn't work, you might decide that you want to move away from one type of activity and try something new. And it also helps set goals, not just personal teacher goals of what one might want to do to change instruction in your classroom, but also to make sure that you are setting goals that are going to be, larger than just in that one space. So a framework can help set goals district-wide, school-wide, within a grade level team, or within an individual teacher's role. And so a framework can really give that common language, provide a context for reflection, and help set goals as well. So as you think about when you might reference a framework, when you are evaluating how different technology tools are really working within different settings, it might be that you are looking for this to happen in coaching settings. You might reference a framework when you are having coaching conversations. When you are planning and coming together for planning meetings and saying, what are we really using this tool for? Or we have these Chromebooks. What do we really want to happen with them? In those planning meetings, you might have a conversation where you reference a framework. During PLCs, where you have a common goal, or you're reviewing student work, or you're looking to see what's working or what's not working, you might say, you know what, we're using this digital tool only to accomplish this one thing. It's just a substitution. It's not a particularly redefining a moment for using technology. What can we do here that is different? And you might even bring a framework into conversations that you have with mentors and mentees, right? To say, this is what I'm really looking or struggling with. How can we move forward together? So lots of times when a framework can come in handy when you're evaluating specific tools, but also thinking about the implementation and the use of those tools. One thing I always like to mention, and I just had this conversation recently with a group of educators. I was leading a full day kind of Task Before Apps Institute day in Buffalo, New York. And one of the things that we talked about was that there's not going to be a tool that is a S on the sound framework or an M or an R. It's not the tool, it's really how you're using it. So referencing frameworks in conversations that are coaching, planning, PLC, mentor-mentee meetings are all great times to really push our thinking around that too. Now, framework and EdTech decisions, right, come together hand in hand. And tools, as I mentioned, do not equal levels. It's not going to be an automatic win or fix just because you have access to a particular tool, unless you're using that tool to help share student work, or you're curating resources and pushing them out through an LMS, right? That action with the tool is what's going to help you reach a particular level, if you will, on a framework. So important to keep in mind when you're making decisions on the different types of technology you're bringing in. It's not just the what, but it's also the how you're going to use those particular tools. And professional development around those specific use cases, thoughtful planning around that is really an important part of the conversation. You want to think about use cases that have been successful in the past beyond individual products. So knowing that you are going to use a particular product, tie that in hand with the use case that you have in mind to demonstrate how that particular product is going to help accomplish that goal. And the framework that you decide to use, right, is not something that we're thinking of as an tool simply for evaluation of yes, you're doing it or no, you're not here yet, but also for consistent vocabulary for conversations around EdTech decision making, as well as conversations that you're having on smaller scale for lesson planning or for integration of a particular tool. So frameworks and our EdTech decisions have a really important part. Although I gave you just a quick overview of the ACEs framework, as well as TPACK, T3, and SAMR, it can really help you have conversations to identify use cases that will then let you decide which tool or which product is going to be the very best to help you meet that. Because the tool is not going to help you reach a particular level. It's the action behind using that tool that's really crucial here. And so when we talk about this tasks before apps mindset, this is where the frameworks come in to help us make those really thoughtful EdTech decisions. Now, how do you identify key goals for the school year, right? As we bring in different tools into play, we evaluate what's working and what's not working. How can you identify those key goals? Well, first off, start by examining curriculum maps and standards. This is going to help you have conversations around what you want to accomplish over the course of the year. So if you are looking at your maps and you're saying, this is what we do in January in grade 4. This is what happens in our middle school social studies curriculum in September. Right? When you look at that map and you identify what is happening over the course of the year, you can identify your key goals for technology integration that go hand in hand with the key goals you have for content and instruction. Now, if you don't have a specific map of what you are hoping to accomplish over the course of the year, and you're building towards that with your kind of curriculum planning committee or goals, you might want to pull in a particular unit of study and go through that exercise with particular unit of studies to say, what are we really looking to accomplish here? What are our goals? If you are doing this with curriculum that's already aligned to the standards, fantastic. If you are lacking in terms of having that core curriculum established, you're not quite sure what you're looking to accomplish in terms of curriculum goals just yet, you may want to examine your state, your local standards, national standards document to say what is it that students within this particular group are looking to accomplish for this year. In addition to those curriculum goals and instructional goals that you have, you also want to identify goals outside of the curriculum. Now, many schools are adopting, whether it's mandated in their state or not, SEL or social emotional learning curriculum, or they're mandated to have a certain part of the day for SEL work. Another area I would say that could be outside of your curriculum or infused into your curriculum that might be a subset of this could be around goals for digital citizenship or community service. So think about those areas outside of the traditional curriculum, if you will. And that's something where you also want to identify what are your key goals that fall into those areas. All of this is going to help you best decide what type of digital tools and resources you want and evaluate what kind of ed tech is actually going to give you not just the most bang from your buck in a kind of capital line item standpoint, but be the best use of everyone's time from a quality versus quantity perspective as it relates to your goals. Now, in keeping in mind here, when we're talking about this idea of your goals, you also want to think about soft skills and hard skills. Now, sometimes these terminology get, a bad rap, and I see that happen sometimes on Twitter and conversations. I use these terms because they are kind of generally accepted, and I don't place more value on one or the other as much as saying, right, we think of our soft skills as being more interpersonal communication skills, things that have to do with collaboration that are not necessarily right on a list of learning goals, where our hard skills, if you will, are the ones that are listed kind of on the to-do of what kids need to accomplish in order to be college and career ready in a more traditional sense. So I'm not using these terms to place more value on one or the other, right? But as a reminder that if you are seeing some skills that you know are essential for students that do not fall on your to-do list, it doesn't mean that they're less important, or you can prioritize them in different ways. So all of these might come together to really help you identify those key goals that you have for the school year. So keeping all of these things in mind, you also want to decide what kind of ed tech is in action, right? And what kind of ed tech do you want to be in action with those goals in mind? So a few questions that can help guide you as you explore these ideas this school year is, what current tools do you have access to? Now, this might be from a school leadership perspective to say, okay, we have school-wide subscriptions to these 7 things, right? That's part of the puzzle. You also want to say, what tools are teachers paying for themselves? Or if you're a classroom teacher, right, what are you paying for yourself that would go on this list of current tools that a student and teacher have access to? So this kind of understanding of where everyone's at, kind of this survey to say, what are we all using, right, could come from just one person, right, in that leadership role. But I encourage you to send out that survey to everyone to say, what are you actually using? What do you have regular access to right now? Then how are those current tools used in practice? Just because you have a subscription to something, it doesn't mean it's being used by everyone. So taking that into consideration to say, what are the things that we have access to? How are they actually being used every day? So having a measurement of what that looks like whether it is a teacher or student survey providing that data to you, right, or a more robust tool, right, to give you access to that information, right, that's going to be important when we say, what are our goals after we've identified those key goals, and then how can we use EdTech to do that and to make sure we have the very best tools to make that happen. So then what you are asking yourself next is, what tools will help you meet your goals? So those current tools you have access to and the way you're using them may be helping you meet your goals right now, and you just need to scale that so that it's happening all the time in lots of different ways. But if you know that you have specific goals in mind for students, maybe it's around collaboration, maybe it's around empathy in the classroom, right? Then you need to ask yourself, what tools will help you meet your specific goals? And then how can you ensure action plans are in place? So if you know what tools will help you meet your goals, how can then you make sure that those tools are actually being used, that they are being used with fidelity, but also in high quality, not just quantity? So these are the kind of questions that you might ponder yourself to say, what's really going on and where do we want to go? But I think the more important piece to think of is how you can bring other folks into these conversations and address these questions. So community stakeholders from within the four walls of your school, as well as those who are outside of your school but are enthusiastic and want to make sure they're part of those conversations too. So this planning that takes place that will help you evaluate what tools are really working in their current use, but then also making sure you're choosing tools as an addition to this to really take it to the next level, right, will require you to have a team of folks who are committed to this vision and of working together. So your action team might include teachers from different grade levels, school admin from across the district, instructional coaches who spend lots of time in lots of people's classrooms and have a full picture. It might be community members, family members who want to make sure that technology is being used in high quality, exciting ways that meet the goals that have been identified by the school and beyond, right? All of those things are part of the conversation when developing, right, an action team for EdTech planning. You may also want to set up a pilot program so that you can monitor how certain tools are being used with quality learning experiences. One important thing to mention about a pilot program, of course, is that you want to make sure that the folks who do take part in it are committed to working through that pilot with fidelity, right? A pilot program isn't saying we're all going to use this one tool, let's check in once a week and see how it goes, unless you know how that tool is going to be used, what implementation is going to look like, what the norms are going to look like in different classrooms, so that you can start having productive conversations about what's working and what you want to explore further. Providing time for EdTech planning that includes reflection is really important as well. This is where conversations and around the use of different frameworks that you might decide to use can help you evaluate and say, this type of EdTech is helping us meet this goal, or this EdTech tool that we brought in is fun, everyone really likes it, but it's a little bit more flashy than substance. And so we want to make sure we're purposeful with those kind of decisions as well. You also want to make sure that there's clear follow-up that might be built into something like a pilot program. It might be built into your initial kind of rollout with new tools, but follow-up, and when it's strategic, can really provide you with information to say what's working or what's not working, so that you can decide, right, if you want to keep using that same tool in the previous year, or that you use a previous year in the following year. You can then have conversations that are really built into the schedule for that type of follow-up. And of course, right, when you are thinking about those key goals that you've identified of what you really want to accomplish this year, and you choose technology that's going to help you meet those goals, you might sit down and revise those goals, revise that action plan that you've set up, right? Because we know that this is a process to figure out what's going to work best with your goals that you've set, right, for your students over the course of the year. So as we keep moving forward and think about strategies for now choosing that ed tech and making sure your tool belt has everything it needs in order to be successful, there's a few different things that you can kind of keep in mind here to make sure you have everything that you need. First off, you really want to make sure that this is something where you are choosing tools that are, right, flexible, right? So choosing tools that you can use in lots of different ways. What does this mean? Well, flexible tools provide lots of options in the ways that you can use them. There are multiple use cases, and this really can be something that's used cross-curricular and friendly for everyone. So as you're evaluating tools to bring into your school, or you're evaluating tools you already have and want to make sure that they are the best ones you could possibly have, or that you want to renew or keep going with them, asking yourself, are these tools flexible is really important. Flexible tools will let you use them in many different ways. So when we talk about providing lots of options, a flexible tool is one that might be very open-ended, where it's kind of a choose your own adventure, blank canvas, like a movie making tool or a website creation tool or a podcast recording tool. There's so many use cases for something like that that could be cross-curricular. So if a tool could work in a fourth grade social studies classroom and also work in a ninth grade biology classroom, right, that's going to be really important to take into consideration when you are making an investment in a tool. You also want to make sure it's friendly for everyone. That includes working on all the different types of devices that you have, meeting the needs of lots of different learners, and of course, being accessible for students who have accessibility needs as well. Now, is every tool that you bring into a school going to work for everyone? Most likely not. Not everything is designed to be so broad. So when you're thinking about tools that are flexible, they might reach a wide range of the population of your school. They might need meet a particular need that a certain subpopulation has, and that's okay. But you want to also make sure that you're thinking about that flexibility, the multiple use cases, cross-curricular implementation, things that provide lots of options, right, as part of the conversation, not necessarily, right, a must. In addition to having tools that are flexible, you also want to make sure that the EdTech tools you bring in are responsive. So they are ones that respond to a variety of needs. This might include adaptive software, where you are giving students access to software that uses artificial intelligence to figure out a baseline, respond to students as they grow in a particular area, and adapt along the way. You also want tools that are going to provide formative assessment opportunities so that you can check for understanding regularly, right? Providing real-time data, making it easy for teachers to give feedback. So responsive tools are ones that lend themselves to a lot of different environments in this way, that could fall into an adaptive software category, checking for understanding, giving data in real time, providing feedback from teachers to students or student to student, so very responsive in that manner. You also want to make sure that you have access to tools that allow for students to be creative. So tools that fall into a creative category are open-ended, right? That's where some of those flexible tools we mentioned, right, allow for student creativity. And maybe it's an ebook creation tool. Maybe it is that website publishing tool or a document creation tool. It gives students an opportunity to choose their own pathway. So perhaps not so much like clicking on a button to choose their own adventure, as much as a pathway for how they're going to share what they learned. So tools that use audio so students can record their voice, video so students can produce a movie file, and have a combination of music along with images. And when you use creative tools, you also want to make sure that there's either built in or teachers are prepared for quality learning experiences, that scaffolding takes place to help students move through different steps of a project. So there's support ready for them as they create a product to show off their learning. Next up on our list of things to include or strategies to consider when building your EdTech tool belt are tools that are collaborative. So when you look at this list of kind of collaborative tools and making sure you have all of those kind of things ready for students, you want to make sure that this connects to goals you have around those softer skills, but important, essential skills, right? Around collaboration, right? Making sure students are able to collaborate in different ways. Now, in my Task Before Apps book, and what I'm about to share with you here, right, I talk about collaboration with digital tools in 3 different categories: remote, shared screen, and role-based. Remote collaboration is when you are in 2 different like live documents, maybe in a different time zone even, typing in, leaving feedback with one another. Shared screen is when you are leaning over, sharing that screen, pointing with your finger and saying, what about that? Couldn't we add this here? And then role-based is when you're on your own device, but you are participating in a group, but you just have your own thing that you're doing, and then you will bring it back to the group. So your own kind of subtask, if you will. Now, when using collaborative tools, you may use all 3 of those models. You might have other goals that you want to connect to, but that's really what we're thinking about here. And then last on the list of strategies for building that EdTech tool belt is thinking about tools that are curious, that help promote curiosity in the classroom. Now, you might use tools that help students provide you information on what they're excited about. So tools that provide you a way to conduct interest surveys or check-ins with kids. You might look for tools that help spark student ideas before a PBL project. You might look for tools that bring virtual reality or augmented reality into the classroom. And you might even look for tools that help support students during like inquiry-based experiences. Now, the idea with the 5 on this list is that you can look for tools and evaluate tools based on how they fall into these different categories. So are they flexible? Are they responsive? Are they creative? Are they collaborative? Do they promote curiosity? Now, it doesn't mean that everything has to check all of these boxes, but again, it's part of that conversation of evaluating how are we really using these tools, right? All of these pieces can come into play here. Now, as we keep thinking about putting this into action and we're actually moving forward with the things that we've talked about together today, there are a few strategies I like to highlight to make sure that you are using the information that we've talked about with frameworks, with the different types of tools and use cases to make sure you can now go off and run with these tasks before apps idea. One of my favorite ready for tomorrow strategies is to set goals that are this week, this month, this year goals. When we break down our goals into those chunks, they become a lot more manageable and actionable for us. So even as you're watching this today, maybe you're with us live on a Wednesday, you're going to say, you know what, this week, I'm going to take stock of what I'm actually using in my classroom, or I'm going to make an interest survey, or I should say a survey, and send it out to my staff and say, what tools do you actually use, right? How much time a day do you use? What could you totally live without, and what do you wish that you have, right? So that might be a short-term, this week type of goal for you, and you know that this month you want to pull together an action team. You want to make sure your PLCs are focused around these conversations. You want to choose a framework, right? So you can build into what we're talking about today in the this week, this month, this year type of chunks. You also want to think about who is your partner in tech. So not your partner in crime, but your partner in tech. It might be someone else in your building who is also interested in exploring and evaluating how tools are actually being used. You might feel like you're a little lonely, right, in your space, and you don't have that person to bounce ideas off of. So you might join a virtual book club or jump into a Twitter chat, right? Or reach out to someone in social media who's tweeting or sharing or putting things on Instagram about the same ideas that you're excited about so that they can maybe be that partner in tech, that person you check in with and say, this is working really well. We're struggling to figure out if this EdTech tool is really giving us the most bang for our buck, right? Have you had an experience with it, right? And searching out and finding those people. You also want to make sure that when we are talking about this idea today, right, of the task before apps and evaluating tools, that you keep your tool belt light, right? You want to make sure tools are flexible to be used in different ways, do promote creativity and collaboration, but you don't need 100 tools to make that happen, right? You need your core tools that a classroom teacher might focus on, that a school leader might institute building wide. When I come to schools, talk about education technology, right, I usually talk about strategies, right? But I want to make sure that the strategies I'm sharing could be used in action. So what I often ask school leaders before I come to do professional development is, what are your spotlight tools? What are the tools that you really want it to be in everybody's tool belt? And then I'll make sure when we talk about strategies that I connect it to that tool belt, right? So it's part of keeping your tool belt light is that you can really have a lot of great work around what you're doing, right? But you don't need to have a million tools to make it happen in action. And then, of course, share your story, right? I love tweeting and sharing and all sorts of fun stuff on social media, right? At Class Tech Tips. A lot of you who followed along or found the webinar that way, right? I share a lot on social media. And it's not because I'm out there saying, this is what I did today, isn't it exciting? As much as saying, here's something that's working for me that I'm really pumped up about. Here's something that I'm finding with an obstacle. Can anyone help me? Right? So you can help someone else build confidence with something by letting them know that you're trying and sharing that experience. But when you share your story, you can also find folks who are excited about this work with EdTech, right? And who can support you in lots of different ways. So I'm really excited that you spent time with me this afternoon to dive into this idea of tasks before apps and evaluating education technology in different ways. I think we're going to hear quickly from our folks at NetRef before we jump into our Q&A, and then do a book giveaway for Task Before Apps. So someone who's with us live still to the end here will win a copy of my book, Task Before Apps.
Great. Thank you so much, Monica. You gave a lot of great information and some wonderful tips to help people really put those tasks before the apps and get the most out of the educational technology we're using. So thanks so much for sharing all of that. And just as a reminder to folks, we will be giving a email out tomorrow, or sending an email out tomorrow with a link to the slide deck. So you'll have all of Monica's great tips there at your fingertips, and also a copy of the recording of the webinar. So you're welcome to view that again or share it with colleagues. So very quickly before we get to the Q&A, I do want to thank our sponsor, NetRef, who brought Dr. Burns with us today. And as she shared, there are a lot of choices when it comes to educational technology, and it's important to make sure that the tools that we're selecting and using are delivering a return on investment and a return on learning. And NetRef can help with that. You can monitor and manage website and app usage at the individual student, class, and school level with NetRef. And all of this information is then available in reports that will help you determine which EdTech tools are really being used the most by individual teachers, by students, and across the school. So helping make some of those decisions about what are the best tools to keep in your tool belt. NetRef works on any device, and it doesn't require any downloads to individual devices, which makes it really nice for one-to-one and BYOD schools. But it does work in all technology environments and is a great resource. So we thank NetRef for sponsoring today's webinar, and I encourage you to check out net-ref.com and reach out if you're interested in a demo or even a trial of the technology. So let's go ahead and get to a couple questions, and then we'll get to the much anticipated book drawing. So let's see. So early on, you did mention the frameworks, and apparently this educator school has not adopted a official framework, and she's wondering just how important you feel that is that a school or a district all has that framework, or can she and maybe a couple of her teachers in her group kind of say, here's what we're working on, and go from there?
I think the most important part is really making sure everyone's on the same page, which is what a framework can help when it comes to vocabulary and just consistency. So I don't think you have to have a framework as much as making sure that you have clear expectations and understanding of best use cases for digital tools. So instead of a framework, right, maybe if you're thinking about it from like an instructional coach perspective, you may want to have a couple really great use cases and then talk about why those use cases are so wonderful when it comes to quality uses of digital tools, and bring that to the table when you are doing planning and coaching.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think, like you said, the most important thing is that everybody's kind of talking the same language and headed in the same direction. At early grades, what percentage of class time do you think should include the use of educational technology?
So there's a lot of conversations around screen time and what's appropriate for students in different ages. So you, of course, especially if you're working with really early learners, want to take into consideration the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations when it comes to joint media engagement as well. However, right, I am always hesitant to talk about a specific number beyond that kind of health side of things because it really comes down to the why, right, or the use cases. So you know, if you're using adaptive learning software where kids are quizzing and practicing, like you really do want to have a limit that's not happening like too much of a chunk of the school day. But when it comes to the other interactions that kids are using, it really comes down to use cases, right? Like, is this a tool that's really being helpful because kids are now annotating and color coding using their voice to interact with text? Well, you know, that's not so much about them staring at a screen answering quiz questions as much as them interacting with the text, right? If they're snapping pictures of a bean experiment in a 4th grade classroom, or of a lab that they're doing in a 10th grade classroom, because they're going to pull it together to make an interactive ebook to share with a partner class on the other side of the world. Well, I'm not as concerned about their minutes with a tablet or a Chromebook in their hand. I'm more concerned about, right, what their interaction with different content looks like. So I know that's not a picture perfect answer in terms of a number, but it really comes down to those use cases and just saying, is this a quality use case? Is this something I could do without technology, right? What is happening here that's making this so special?
Which goes back to the main theme of today, the task before the app. So what are we hoping to accomplish and learn, and what's the best tool to do that? So you did mention some suggestions for administrators, like sending out a survey to teachers to kind of figure out what's being used most. And as I mentioned, NetRef can help figure that out too with your educational technology. But this particular administrator has, I think, what is a pretty common issue. They've basically been given EdTech by the district, and a lot of money has been invested in that educational technology, and it's really not being used. Other technologies are being used instead. Do you have some recommendations for trying to get perhaps underused but expensive technology into the rotation?
Yeah, if you have, if you already have valuable resources at your disposal and they're not being used, it really then comes back to right, how can we put this into action, right? What's those quality use cases going to look like? And then how can we make sure everyone is supported to make that happen? So it might be more about, what does professional development look like to help provide an understanding of how to navigate a new tool, how to incorporate it into the school day so that it's being used effectively, right? If there are issues when it comes to prioritizing time and there just doesn't feel like there's time for something, right? Are there going to be different concessions made for rearranging schedule if that is a priority? So I think it really comes down to taking stock of what the roadblocks are. It might be more casual conversations of why is no one using this? Like, is no one excited about this? Is it something that there's an obvious reason that it doesn't fit that I just can't see, right? Or something like that. So really make sure that you understand what the roadblocks are, because if it is something like, I'm not sure how to use this, or I don't know how this fits in with what I'm always doing, right? Those are the kind of things more strategic professional development and coaching can help support. So that will require some of that initial time with fact finding, and then the time that's allocated to kind of following up and addressing the concerns that you've identified.
Yeah, and I think that can often happen in those PLCs where you can have some of those conversations, or in your small team meetings, things like that, figure out what's going to be most beneficial and how to move forward with those tools that we do have.
Exactly.
Let's see. Let's go ahead and we'll take one more question, and then we'll do our book drawing. I know everyone's excited for that. Do you have one of the frameworks that you presented? Do you have one that you prefer or recommend over the others?
So the ACEs framework, right, is one that I've developed and highlight in my book, Tasks Before Apps. So, a little bit partial to that because I think it fills in some of the kind of areas where, when we're feeling like, oh, I'm only substituting, or how can I ever get to a redefinition, right? It helps kind of chunk different use cases to evaluate it kind of in the way that we're talking about today. But that being said, right, the SAMR model is really popular. There's resources out there to support that as well. Again, that's not something that I would want to be seen as like a teacher evaluation tool, as much as a way to say there's going to be times when substitution is okay, but can I move myself to something that's more transformational, right? So that's up at that M and the R on that level, because that's really what it's going to do, is going to help us say, what am I doing that's different, that wasn't possible 10 years ago or 5 years ago or the year before I got this access to this in my classroom. So those are the two that I tend to recommend more frequently, but I think there's a lot of great meat within the T3 framework and TPACK as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking those questions, and thanks everyone who asked them out in the audience. I think it's now time to announce the winner of our drawing for the free copy of Monica's book, Task Before Apps. So Monica, do you have our lucky winner?
I do. So I see our winner just came through. It's Gabriella Gonzalez. So congratulations on winning a copy of Task Before Apps. I will sign it for you and send it out to you. So really excited that you joined us live today.
Yes, thank you, Gabriella, and thanks to everyone else who joined, and congratulations. And Gabriella, I will be reaching out to you to get your mailing address, so do look for an email on that later this afternoon. So again, everyone, you'll get an email tomorrow with a link to the recording and the presentation deck, and we'll also have that posted on the NetRef website, net-ref.com. So take a minute to go out there and check out that great tech tool for managing both internet access in your classrooms, as well as determining the ROI of the tools that you're using. And one last reminder before we sign off, we will be having another webinar on March 26th. Vicki Davis, the Cool Cat teacher, will be joining us to share 5 ways teachers can progress in their use of technology. And you'll also find more information and registration about the registration link on the NetRef website. So thank you, Monica, for joining us today, and as always, sharing all this great information. I know it's given folks lots of things to think about and to take back to their practice.
Thank you so much for having me.
Have a great afternoon, everybody.